Should an organization split the roles of the company secretary and the head of legal? Hi, my name is Jimmy Walabichi and you're welcome to Corporate Governance Africa, where we seek to promote good governance through film. In this video, we consider the question of whether or not an organization ought to consider separating the roles of the company secretary and the head legal. The role of the head legal is to provide legal advice, to manage litigation, ensure compliance with laws, and address legal risks facing the organization. On the other hand, the role of the company secretary is to oversee corporate governance, ensure compliance with statutory regulations, and facilitate communication between the board, management, and the shareholders of that organization. Many organizations fuse the two roles, but is that the best way to govern an organization? We consider the example of Stanbic Bank Uganda Holdings Limited. In January 2019, Stanbic Bank separated the roles of the head legal and the company secretary of the organization. Later that year, on the 1st of April 2019, Stanbic Bank fully transitioned into a holding company. The bank had sought to become a holding company in order to house banking and non-banking subsidiaries. Other subsidiaries now include Stanbic Properties Limited, Stanbic Business Incubator Limited, FlyHub Uganda, and SBG Securities Limited. We consider the reasons for splitting the two roles. I interviewed the head legal, Wekesa Okoboi, and the company secretary, Dr. Rita Kabatunzi, both of Stanbic Uganda Holdings Limited, for their views on the advantages of splitting the roles, also exploring the reasons why the split was actually effected by the organization. First, I asked Rita, the company secretary, why the organization's board resolved to split the roles. Here she says that the reason was to enable the company secretary on the one hand and the head legal on the other to perform their roles effectively.
Anytime that you allow for a professional to focus on one key area, it's good. That's my own thought, that anytime that you combine two roles that are distinct, you're going to have a challenge. I think in Uganda, these roles, not just in Uganda actually, in many parts of the world, they are merged because there's a thinking that governance is an extension of legal. Not so at all. Governance is about business and leadership. So unless you have an individual who's able to dedicate time to both equally and is supported by a team that is able to do that, one area is going to suffer. That is the reality. And in our case, that's what happened in terms of the board making the decision that if we are going to go into becoming a holding company, because that's what we are now, there was a need to make sure that there was focus on both areas. So, legal is important, governance is important. If you're a holding company, you then need a structure driven, well-governed, all the way from the parent or the holding company, so to speak, and the subsidiaries. And that's what informed the Stanbic decision specifically.
Notice that Rita said that the board resolved to split the roles at a time when the business was reorganizing its business structure. It evolved from a single company to a group structure with a holding company and subsidiaries. This means that when a company evolves and becomes more complex, it's advisable for them to seriously consider whether or not they should split the roles so that either role is performed effectively. Governance structures must work hand in hand with the evolution of the organization. I also asked the head legal, Wekesa Okoboi, whether combining the roles would have an impact on the effectiveness of the head legal and the company secretary of the organization. Listen to the perspective of the head legal.
When you're double hatting, and typically the double hatting is between legal and company secretary. When you're double hatting, in that time that you are preparing for board meetings, which is potentially three or 4 weeks in advance of the actual meetings, depending on when board packs are due under your own structure. 3 to 4 weeks prior to the board meeting, you're actually not doing any legal work. You're not. You're completely swamped in just the preparations for the board meeting. And then as soon as you finish the last board meeting, the pressure to go back to your legal desk is so high that you will more or less dump everything that has come out of the board meeting. You'll defer that and say, I'll deal with that later. What that does is that it actually reduces your work in the board to record management, And yet we know out of a board meeting, there are just so many governance items to close out on, to follow through, that now become a subject of panic a few weeks before the next cycle of meetings. So, you never really do either job well, but more importantly, you never get to the point where your CS can actually be the governance advisor that they need to be. So many things should be happening between board meetings, okay? But those fall away. They are not attended to, or if they are only partially attended to. So in answer to your question, yes, I think it really does undermine the CS role and keeps it in the box of administration, which we all know is no longer relevant. Yeah.
From what Rita and Candy are saying, a company secretary or a head legal would be more effective if the roles are split. But isn't it expensive to achieve this? And isn't it expensive to split the roles? What if an organization cannot afford it? Let's hear what Rita has to say about the cost of splitting the roles instead of fusing the roles.
It's not the same for everyone. It's a very costly move, and that's the reality. It is a very costly move. So you have to have a different team, focus on building that team just like you focus on building legal. And so it's not something that will commonly be adopted. It's just a few companies that are able to make that move. But if you do manage to make it, I think that there is a lot of value in that separation because governance permeates everything that the business does, and just focusing on that alone is a lot of work. Yet legal also sits with a risk that is really big for a company.
But if the cost of splitting the two roles is too high, can't an organization improvise or find a middle ground?
Some people have argued that, well, you can have one person, but with, specialist, with specialist team members. One who does governance, one who does legal, which is what a lot of companies do because that's the pragmatic, cost-effective way. But where you do separate them, you will almost always see that both are driven very, very much in a much better way. The board demands a lot of time because you've demanded a lot of the board, So in order for that to be done right, the board needs to have access to a company secretary who's available and who can focus on the governance-related issues. So it depends on how much you want to elevate governance in terms of the organization. So absolutely, if you can afford it, I say, yeah, do split them.
Splitting the roles of the company secretary and the head legal depends a lot on the stage of growth of the organization. Splitting the roles also depends on how committed the organization is towards better corporate governance or better business governance. It also depends on whether the organization can afford it. In any event, the role and function of the company secretary on the one hand and that of the head legal is very important, and organizations ought to do their best in their ability to provide the best environment in which either of these roles can be performed effectively. So what do you think? Should your organization split these roles if the roles are fused at the moment? Think about it.